Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Three Principles Global Community webinar. The Three Principles Global Community, or 3PGC, is a nonprofit organization that's committed to bringing an understanding of the three principles to people throughout the world. Today, we have Harry Derbitsky with us. Harry is an author and a Three Principles educator. He was an early student of Sydney Banks on Salt Spring Island. Harry's the president of ACT, Advanced Coaches Training, and specializes in projects and trainings in the major areas of heavily addicted and low income, high risk of Indigenous Native Americans. He mentors and Zoom room and sessions worldwide, including North America, Europe, and South America. Harry's understanding is expressed via his insights regarding the three universal principles of mind, consciousness, and thought, as uncovered by his teacher, Sydney Banks, who stated in the book, The Missing Link, all human behavior and social structures on Earth are formed via mind, consciousness, and thought. And Harry's going to talk about Sydney Banks and the spiritual reality that we live in. So, Harry, I am very excited that you're here today with us. This is going to be fun. I know you've joined in many, but I don't think that we've done a webinar together before. So glad to hear what you have to share.
Oh, great. Nice to see everybody. In Anna's talk last week, she did a series called The Role of Sydney Banks and in what we're doing and so on. And at the end of it, I did episode 10, I said, we're all blessed. And this is really important, is that to have gratitude for how lucky we are to even know about the principles and what it has done in our life. That's important to carry along within what you are. And when I knew Sid, before he passed on for about 40 years, I had all these stories and teachings inside of me. And all I can tell you is over the last 6 or 7 years, the ability to teach and remember and re-experience these stories has changed my life, because his truth is spiritual and it goes on and on. So I'm sure all of us have read or listened to something and then listened to it again and read it and said, I don't remember it. It's all brand new, etc. So the spiritual nature of what Sid taught, which was primarily what he taught on Salt Spring, and then the psychologist came and it changed flavor. And when it changed flavor, I didn't like it. So I didn't go that way. And this is very important for you guys. I want you to really listen to this. I followed my instincts. Everybody went into psychology, and I went into Indigenous, Native American. I did not want to follow that road, so I followed my own road. And Sid said, oh, you're a smarty guy. You have found a niche, because nobody else wanted it. Nobody else was in it. It had an advantage. I needed to have an independent reality for myself. And at the same time, it had a disadvantage. I didn't follow the teachings of the psychological movement that was happening in the 80s, 90s until he passed on. Now, one of the very important things in his autobiography that's not published, Beyond Time, Space, and Matter, that's spiritual, beyond time, space, matter. He said, psychology, he did not pick psychology. Psychology picked him. And it's the same story I have. I did not pick Native American or Indigenous people to teach. It picked me. And then later in my life, when I was 69, addiction picked me. So I didn't choose the directions of my careers and how I wanted to coach and who I wanted to coach. It just happened, type of thing. Now, Sid on one of his early tapes said the spiritual is eternal. And eternal to me means also eternal learning. You're never coming to the end. You never arrive at a place where you know it all. In fact, the joke is the more you understand, the less you know. It's like, oh, it's because your ego is dropping. Your concepts are dropping. The quiet of your mind is increasing. So all of a sudden, everything becomes learning. And the learning is eternal, is very inspiring. It's beautiful and invigorating. It's something I have really loved getting older. I'm almost 74. And and I feel mentally and spiritually younger than I did 10 years ago. Physically, I won't say I feel 10 years younger, but those two I do, because the learning, everything is fascinating and interesting. So it's an eternal learning. And what I found when I went into the indigenous world, so everybody went into psychology, and I went into the indigenous world. So I had a personal ear to Sydney Banks. And the other thing I had was I was his son's best friend. So I knew the dad as well as the human being, as well as the enlightened being type of thing. And the spiritual world of Sydney Banks loved the native world because it was very, very similar to the way that he looked at life, mystical. And what he pointed to me was, you don't talk about mind, thought, and consciousness. You talk about spirit, thought, and consciousness, because that's their world. They have their own way of seeing things. The other thing he was very proud in the indigenous world was he had a pipe that was, now, most of you don't know what a pipe means. I'm a pipe carrier, a very, very powerful pipe carrier. And Sid was given a pipe by one of the most spiritual leaders in North America, and he put it on the wall. He didn't practice being a pipe carrier because, of course, he was already, that was not a requirement for where he was at. But he put it on the wall of his office, and he glowed when he showed people that. It meant a lot to him. And the pipe, what it meant to me was, in the native world, like in the white world, the non-native world, we've got PhD. That's what all the psychologists have, PhD, the highest level of education. The highest level in the native world is the pipe. That's your symbol of wisdom. They're the ones that are leading the way. They're the most wise. And what happens with that is, when the pipe came to me, I could teach the people about stuff that we know, but in their language, not 3P language. That's why 3P is not successful in the indigenous world. They don't understand where the people are at and the language that they'll receive. And I found that to be true for myself as well. I'd never talked about this. I'm only talking about this because that's what I felt was right. And also because of, the tragedy in the United States, where we have the Black people. It's not only about racism. It is also about the white people don't understand how the colored people think. And that's the same thing with the indigenous world. But I walked into it. I walked into it as a pipe carrier. And as soon as I had the pipe, they started to listen. Before it, they didn't listen. But with the pipe, before I was just the white guy giving them some good ideas. Then the pipe came. It was a spiritual journey. And when you do the pipe, it's about space, guys. It's about the spiritual space. Fool's Crow talked about it being hollow bones. The more hollow the bones, Sid loved this metaphor. He just loved it. The more hollow the bones are that flow through you, the stronger the healing, the less interference that you have within the world of healing. That's the space Sid's talking about mind. That's mind. That other stuff, that's just words. Mind's hollow bones. And when it flows through, you can hear it. It guides you. See, the pipe is a tool, but on another level, it leads you. It takes you into another reality. I can't explain that to you, but the pipe I carry is very powerful. It's a tonka. It's a huge buffalo, very impressive pipe. And in it, I have special medicines, just like you have special medicines, special talents in the spiritual reality. Those are things you want to uncover in yourself. And when you uncover it, you find out who you are. And of course, it all starts with Sid's message. It's all inside. That's all the pipe is doing. It's all inside. You just have to uncover that. And you uncover your gifts, your mystical gifts, your special gifts of why you're here on this earth and what you have to share. You're not here to share a book about 3P. You're here to share you and what you understand and what you feel. And that is what takes you into it. I was talking, we had a gathering in Vancouver. It's the homeless people, and led by this amazing Indigenous woman. So they're all around and they have a sacred fire. And there was an elder that I've gotten fairly close with. And I mentioned to him about silence. Now that's where the answer is. I've got a quote from Sid. I like this quote. In the silence beyond all things lies the divine knowledge that will help guide you through life. That's the answer. And I said to him, this very, very wise elder who has a strong spiritual feeling, stronger than most people in 3P. See, that's the uniqueness of the people. Psychologically, they can learn a lot from us, but spiritually, they're ahead. And that's hard for 3P to understand, how people could be deeper in the spiritual reality of life and yet have psychological problems. So I talked to him about the silence. He intuitively knew. He says, yeah. I said, why do the Indigenous people, why do they so easily go into silence? And what was interesting, he said, well, it's instinctual to us. It's just, that's how we are. It's instinctual to everyone, is what he's really saying. But they have opened up to that way in an easier manner than, let's say, the non-Indigenous people in the world. Of course, that's what attracted me to the people. One of the things was that they could step into the connection with nature, the connection, and they would see everything as alive, like Sid saw it. The spirit of the rocks, the spirit of the sky, the spirit of everything is alive. And what it points you to is the alive spirit that's alive in you. That's the key. If you can't feel it inside of you, you're not living it. That's why he says if you be ordinary, because you're just an ordinary person. And if the spirit, if you open up to the spirit, it takes over from you. It gives you the ability to be a genius. And you're just an ordinary guy, but it's like you're using the power of the ocean when you're just a droplet. Wow, it just happened. And guess what it attracts? Magic and good luck. That's what we want, magic and good luck. And the indigenous world is full of that teaching about silence. It's the only religion that's female-based. That should give you a clue. All the others are male-based. It's female-based. And their connection. And they have 3 principles too. Just like Sid has the 3 principles of psychology, spiritual. Christ has the 3 spiritual principles of religion, spiritual. And they have the 3 spiritual principles of native spirituality. Father Sky, not the sun, Mother Earth or Mother Nature, and the 7th direction called the spirit within. Spirit within, just the same thing that Sid's pointing towards. He always said to me, if you get a good feeling being in my company, that's not coming from me, that's coming from you. That's the trick. You have to identify with the truth. And the truth is, you're a spiritual being. Yeah, ordinary human being having the human experience. But that's not all you're doing. You're a spiritual. Now, because I was not into the psychological, I had to marry the spiritual and the psychological together. I didn't understand that. So even though I had the teachings of Sid and had a huge spiritual insight, I had a drawback. It didn't include thought. So universal spirit, universal consciousness, but no understanding of thought. And then when I had a separate experience about thought being a boomerang, that anything you think, it boomerangs back into a feeling, I all of a sudden had a navigational tool in my human life that wouldn't take me away from the spiritual feelings. But not until I married those 2 worlds together did I find something really special. And it's the same thing with the native world. Everybody was into the psychological stuff, spiritual psychological, but it was primarily psychological leading to spiritual. I wanted to see, how did native spirituality and 3P join together? And guess where it was? In me, just being an ordinary human being, just being me. At first I talked like this, and then I talked like that. And then in the end, my pipe ceremonies sounded like I was doing like now. It just sounded the same thing. You just be yourself. It's always the ace you have. You don't have to pretend. You don't have to create. You just be yourself. You come on a show like this, you can prepare and do all that stuff, but it doesn't mean much if you're not comfortable with who you are. I love sharing what I have because I know it's a little bit different than what Elsie and Chip share. That's great what they share. They're really beautiful, but it's a little bit different. And I do a little bit different in the psychological world. But people who come to me, generally speaking, they're looking for a spiritual uplift, a cleansing in that direction, so that they can feel the God inside themselves, the spirit within yourself. And when that happens, everything connects. Everything connects. Now, I want to share this insight I had. I hope I hope it helps you. I hope I can explain it, because the first unique quality of this insight was it was about a quarter of a second. It was like that. And yet it revealed to me how free will works. Because I was always confused about that. Sid talked a tremendous amount about free will in his early talks, a lot about free will. And I just couldn't uh, quite, like, I could teach it, but I couldn't understand it. If you want to know what I mean. So you can teach stuff that you don't understand. Now, I had explained to Sid phoned me up, and he said, um, what do the Indians, and the Indigenous, what do they think about? Because he was going to he made a DVD called, a CD called The Great Spirit, which probably most of you haven't heard, but it's a really beautiful talk. It's different than any of his other talks. And so I explained to him what it was, which was actually what I'm going to explain what my insight was, but I didn't realize it at the time. And I said to him, well, they kind of see life as a medicine wheel. And there's the big circle. And he said to me, well, that's God. So that's what he understood the big circle was. It's God. And then there's a little circle in the middle. That's your soul. And then I said, you use thought to connect those two worlds together. And if you misuse thought, of course, you get into, and I said, you know all that stuff. And he says, okay, that's all he needed to know. So he did what he did with the physics people. He didn't know anything about physics, but they had to listen to him when he talked about Einstein's formula. The same thing here. He didn't know anything about native spirituality, but he's an expert in it because his understanding of the spiritual world and the psychological makeup of it is pure. So the pure use of thought and the impure use of thought. So he said on his CD, I was lucky enough to find the center of that wheel. That was his enlightenment experience. And from there, he then expressed things. He read from the paper that I had given, and then he went into his own example of it. So I highly recommend, if you like this type of talk, to listen to that tape, that CD tape, The Great Spirit. It's readily available. And of course, he made it to help anybody who was in the Indigenous world, just like he made tapes on psychology to help people in the psychological field. So here's my insight about free will. I've got my free will. And in that subjective perspective, I create stuff. And then we have God's free will. And when I drop my idea what free will is and how I have free will to do what I want, because that's the problem. That's the problem. And I just connect and accept God's will, I'm one. And things are easy, perfect. And the spiritual reality heals. So just like you've heard everybody else say, when you drop your ego or your subjective and get into the impersonal God and join, then that's the use of free will, to accept God. Now, here's the important thing. I had this with a client yesterday because he was talking about this. I says, well, what's your role in that? And that's what I'm asking you. What's your role in that? Because if you just turn it over to God, which is really the case, what's your role? And you have to answer that question. If you can answer that question, you've got it. If you can't answer that question, you just hang around and wait. It will come. It will come. It will unveil itself. So that insight, even though I can't explain it very well, I honestly can't, has changed my whole concept of what free will to think whatever you want. And it brought a solidity in my understanding that was very, very good. So we simply function a certain way, and we have free will to do it a wise way, a pure way, or an impure way. And when I deal with clients all over the world, they all seem to have the same problem. It's starting to sound like a joke because they're all talking about something different, but it's always the same problem. And the same problem is, I don't like my thoughts, and how do I control these thoughts from happening all the time? Because I'm talking about it and thinking about it all the time. And my job is to go from that world to the positive world and talk about that. And that heals. That heals. So simple. It's so simple. If you think and talk negative, you have to experience negative feeling. The boomerang. It has to happen. And people who you're counseling or coaching, they agree with you, but then they can't stop talking about that. I had a lady the other day who in 3 sessions, I kept telling her I gave her an exercise. I never do it, but she wanted one, so I gave her one. It's easy. And exercise was negative. Watch how you create negative and move it to the positive. And for the first 3 times, she would always go but and go to the negative. And then, pleasantly, the 4th time, she ended up in the positive. Well, that time she looked 20 years younger than she did in the other 3 sessions. She had simply learned to change thought, change her mind. That in Sid's tape, Thought on Alcoholism, which I highly suggest you listen to, that's on my website as a podcast, and also on Addiction, Alcoholism, and 3 Principles, our highly successful show. Sid talked about addiction or alcoholism, and all he talked about was change thought. I remember being at that talk, and someone asked, well, shouldn't they get off the alcohol? Well, he said, well, of course. But he just changed thought. It's really simple. And that's Sid's message. The simpler, the better. If you're making it complicated in your head, it ain't working. It never work. Never, never, never work. So the beauty is to enjoy yourself. Yeah, enjoy yourself. Yeah, that's it. Have a good time. I got a golden rule. If it ain't fun, I'm not doing it. And that's kind of how I see it. And I have another golden rule that I learned from the Indians or the Indigenous. You do your best, and the spirit will take care of the rest. And as near as I can tell, that's the way it works. It's a feeling of love for yourself and letting it happen. A lot of people say, do nothing. That's true. But Sid said, do nothing and listen. That's good. I like that. Any questions? Any questions about like what's it was like to be with Sid, or any questions about why it took me so long to understand what I'm talking about? Why I was so stupid, any of those questions. Why, you know, literally at 69, everything came together. I heard Sid when I was in my 20s. What took so long? Well, you guys probably know a good answer for that one, right?
I don't know. What is your answer?
For what? Why it took? Well, the way I see it is we don't all start at the same place. So where Elsie was and where I was two different places as a starting point. It's true, she was frightened and had all this stuff, but she already had a house. She was kind of an acceptable person. I was just a wild bohemian, crazy guy, and I had a lot of bad habits, and then I had a big ego. And of course, that's in the end is always the answer. So I was in my head a lot. Sid loved my spiritual feelings, but he kept seeing me go in, out, in, out. And basically, the real answer is, Terry, I lost my gratitude. That's the real answer. When you lose your gratitude for what Sid has taught you, you can't grow. And I lost my gratitude. And when you lose your gratitude, you start to lose steam and head in the wrong direction. And that's what happened to me. And it wasn't until I regained my gratitude 40 years later that I actually started to take off again. You see, you never lose anything, Terry. It wasn't like I didn't know that feeling, or I had sort of covered it up, but I hadn't lost it. And so when I was ready to reclaim, and it really happened when he died, I mean, I had a relationship with Sid that I could phone him up and get a little boost because I needed it, and no boost anymore. So I had to find out what I knew. So it actually was a blessing on one level. I had to find out what I knew. And I was attached to the man. That's no good. I wasn't attached to what he was pointing towards inside me. And even though I could teach it, I really wasn't living it. I wasn't, there was, and then I was. And here's the point that changed my life. I was listening to this DVD that Chip and Elsie put on I forget what it's called, that series, The Significant Role, something about appreciating Sid. And I'm listening to it. I have a free day. I'm listening to it with a close friend. And all of a sudden a thought pops up into my head. This is an important thing, guys. I hope you feel the message of this. I wonder what it was like when I was listening to Sid. You see, you listen. You could be around Sid all the time and get nothing. A lot of people got that. Or you can, in one sitting, get everything. That's why you don't need to know Sid, because the message, the books, they're all out there to guide you. It's there waiting for you. But so I wondered what that feeling was when I was really listening with with everything. And I went back to it. It was just waiting for me, Terry. And when I went back to it, my life changed. I was back in. And then there was all this material, all the talks by Sid. I had all the tapes and all the stuff. So I started to listen to the old stuff. And then he came to seminar on mental health. And he was talking to the psychologist for the first time. And I said, well, why don't I just pretend that I'm like them? Since I didn't know anything about the psychological stuff anyway, why don't I just let him fill me up? And then I heard it, and I started. It's all there to learn. It's all there, Terry. All you have to do is investigate it. And so I did. And I also had something else. I was living very happily and content at the same time that was happening. I had become very happy and content, very simple life and stuff like that. So you have to live it. You can't complain all the time. Or I don't know. You know, Sid used to call ego, before he called it an image of self-importance, he called it poor me or dig me. You can't be a poor me in the 3P or a dig me. You just have to be yourself. Terry is beautiful. You know enough. Just the sampling of the 3 principles is so much more that you know that's true than what 98% of the people know out there. It's just amazing. And then you share it. If you want to grow, Terry, you have to share. That's the rule. You can't keep it up bottled inside yourself. And you share it with the grandkids in a one way, and with the school. Like I go into my daughter's school, I share it a different way. Then I work with the addiction people, I share it another way. I work with the Indigenous, I do it another way. You do what, you use your mind to see what works. And as you see what works, it all becomes the same thing. You just be yourself. In the end, any pretense you have is a waste of time. And you also get wiser, and you know what people can't. I love this phrase. Sid said, it's sort of like pearls to swine. And then he broke out laughing and said, another way of saying that is no sense wasting your time talking to a blithering idiot. And I just laughed and laughed, because it's so true. So you learn how to play the game. But the game, it's not a game really. It's really just yourself. Just get to know and love yourself. Like James, do you love your thoughts? Do you love your thoughts? Wouldn't be a bad idea, right? Do you love who you are with your flaws, your bad habits, your insensitivities, your lack of understanding? That's part of the joy. You're not perfect. Nobody, James, made more mistakes than me. And I may have been Sid's toughest student. I mean it. I was tough. I was really stupid. But it didn't matter, because the spiritual experience I had to come out. And I knew it. You see, I didn't give up. I should have, but I didn't. I couldn't give up. And so it worked out just like that. Beyond time, space, and matter. Just like that. Just worked out. Isn't that cool? That's cool. I'm the luckiest guy in the world. I'm just Harry. That's it.
Well, can you hear me? I just wanted to say I love what you said about the spiritual side, or what the indigenous people said about how the spiritual side is instinctual. And I never really thought about it like that. Like it's just an instinct, like people use the analogy all the time of not touching a hot stove. but it's that close. It's just a part of who we are, but we always make we make it so much more tougher than it actually is.
That's right.
Yeah. So I love that. I was actually curious about how they express that, or that conversation that you were mentioning that you had with, what more did he say about that?
Well, the interesting part is, of course, we interfered as in the residential schools and stopped their, as much as we could. We did our best to annihilate them, but their spiritual power was too strong. We were kind of like Hitler, type of thing, and it has to be understood that we're talking about grossness beyond compare, type of stuff that we did to them. But the spirit persevered, and the drink came. And what was interesting, I'm going to get to your question. What was interesting is the easiest people to succumb to the drinking were the wisest, were the shaman, because they were taught just to receive without question. And it felt good. So they received, and of course ended up on the street. But the joke is that after 20 or 30 years on the street, when they came back to do their teachings, they were more powerful than ever. They had never lost their spirit power. It was always just, like my spirit power was never lost. It was just there. And the way they like to express it is in an ordinariness, but they obviously feel this connection to nature. And I'll tell a few stories, but I want to read this by Sid. The wise medicine man in the native North American culture spoke of the world as one spirit, referring to the creator of all things as the Great Spirit. This was their way of explaining the oneness of life. So that's from Sid talking about it. So a lot is done through ceremony, and the ceremony teaches you go inside a sweat lodge, and you do these different rounds, and people go in there with problems, like people come to a conference here in 3P. And then they experience that same spiritual feeling that you have in a conference, and they come out looking 20 years younger. So the power of the spirit is there. The silence is there. And the moment the ceremony starts, so they're going, and then the ceremony starts, and you go into another space. You just step into a space. Now they see spirits, so it's different. They have gifts in certain ways, in that way that you don't have. But the joke is you do have, you just haven't opened up to it. You see, you're a white guy thinking like a white guy, but they're thinking in a different way. That's the same with the blacks. They're thinking in a different way than the whites. They have a different way of relating to things. And for them, spiritual is as natural as talking about the weather. But I'll give you a kind of an example. So, I'm accepted by not all, but by a lot of them, and I'm seen as a powerful carrier of the pipe. And when I did a pipe ceremony, I want to relate something first of the connection between 3P and the pipe, okay? And then I'll go back to what I was going to talk about. So I'm doing this ceremony in this community in honor of this person I knew who had passed away, and 200 natives show up, all the elders from the community, wise people. And I'm in the middle of these 200 people doing a pipe ceremony. One white guy leading the ceremony type of stuff. And you know what I said to myself? Don't think, Harry. Don't think, because you're dead meat if you think, right? You can feel it, eh? I mean, holy mackerel. And so I just got into it. 3P saved my life there, because I would have freaked out. And that's the beauty of the two worlds, the spiritual, and then we did this 1.5-hour ceremony. It was beautiful. And then the wisest elder got up and said, Harry's teaching us to pray. That was the way he saw it. It was just a prayer to God type of thing. So going back to the other story, again, kind of 3PE, like we're doing the sweat, and this very wise man, shaman, comes up, who's leading the sweat, Black Thunderbird man. And my name, I have 2 Indian names. Standing Elk, Waskazoo Gani Poet, Cree, and Lakota, Tatanka Naji, Buffalo Spirit walks the earth type of stuff. So you get these honors, these feelings, they become who you are. It's cool, very cool. I like exotic, I like nice smells, I like different things. And so he comes up to me and says, Harry, you've been around a long time. I know you can see all the spirits around the sweat lodge. And I go, no, I don't see any of them actually, but I can feel them. You see, the same thing. You can feel. They have more visual stuff that they relate to and so on, but it's just a feeling. It's you're indigenous, James. Your feelings every time you hit into a new level of consciousness, that's an indigenous feeling. And you're getting closer and closer to the oneness that they understand instinctually. So they understand that instinctually. They feel that connection. Every thought, every feeling, every action is sacred. Every one is sacred. And that sacred feeling is within you. And when you feel that, you can walk into any situation, including doing a ceremony in front of 200 Native people, indigenous ceremony, and carry it off. Because it's the spirit that carries you through it, not Harry Derbitsky. If it was up to me, son, no chance. I don't know enough. I'm just a guy. The spirit does it. And the more you can see the spirit does it, the more indigenous you are. Now, how could I walk into the indigenous world? Well, I just never was bothered by the fact that everybody was red and I was white. It never bothered me. Just didn't seem to be an issue with me. Did they all like me? No, some of them were prejudiced, of course, but they're taught everyone's blood is the same color when it cuts open type of stuff. The same thing when I went to Yanisha's place. They were Hindu. They were different. The food was different. The relationship with the mom, everything was different. But it was just fun. It was actually a lot of fun, right? Yeah. So you just look, it's like dealing with people who are, say, mentally sick or addicted. Sid says, see them as healthy. See them as the same as you. It's like that. You just talk to their wisdom inside them. They know that. And the indigenous know it better because they're leading me into deeper aspects of me. And that's what I like. You think I'm leading them? Got another thing coming. These are real people who know what God is. They have helped me to see what I couldn't hear from Sid. Sid had the message, but I couldn't get it. I needed something to complement what Sid was teaching. And I did. And it made me into a better person. And then addiction came, And guess what I said? Holy macro. I knew nothing, by the way. Never been addicted, never took a psychology course. And the one area that I was hopeless at with the Indians was addiction, because I was trying to fix them. You're not there to fix people. They have that within themselves, type of thing. So, but the thing that I had with addiction, which I knew nothing about, was it was so much simpler than the indigenous world. Like, it's like, just that. I thought, is this all they're worried about? It's like, you know, I know they're going through a lot of suffering. I know that, but the indigenous world is much more complicated, much more complicated. Yet that's our biggest social problem, you know, the opiate and addiction crisis that we are encompassing, along with the stuff, you know, the racism now and stuff that people are waking up to, type of thing. But the suffering they went through was disgusting. Here, I'll give you an example. Might as well have one disgusting moment. This indigenous guy, he's 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 years old. He's in residential school, and he can't go to the bathroom. How come he can't go to the bathroom, James? He has to go. How come? This is disgusting, Jane, but it gives you an idea of trauma and what they had to go through. The priest was waiting for them in the bathroom, so he peed in his pants. That's disgusting. That's Epstein was crucified, deservedly so, for what he did. But a priest doing it, that sounds to me a little worse. But that was their world. Tough, tough. But they emerging out of that and the greatness. When they come into 3P, you watch your socks come off. They'll lead. When they get it, they'll lead. 3P right now is only a level of what it's going to be in the future. Sid Banks was not just for certain people. It was for everyone. And he loved the poor. He loved people the jail people. He got excited by that. You know, he got really, and he wanted the Indians too, but there were 2 drawbacks. You know what they were, James? Me, number 1, and them, number 2. But eventually they'll be here, you know, eventually. Because they're human beings too, just like you and me. And they want to be spiritually and psychologically happy. That's the idea. But it's a spiritual reality, guys. It's a feeling. You don't have to think about everything. Decisions as your level of consciousness goes up, things that took 2-3 weeks, take 2 or 3 seconds. Well, what are you going to, you just saved yourself 2 weeks of aggravation because it's just so simple. So you just trust it, accept it, live in it more and more. Of course, you understand this is going to keep going, but you just kind of don't pay that much attention to it. And intuitively, if you step into a negative direction, you change your mind. Intuitively or instinctually, you do it. Automatically, you don't think about it. The book says da da da, dee da da. And don't teach the book. Teach what you have experienced and you understand. Teach you. And that will come across to people. It's very easy. All you have to do is be yourself. And it seems to work. I had, I had this guy, he actually was on here, but I guess he's every form of mental illness and stuff like that. Did I talk to him about that? Not one word. I don't know anything about that world. I talked to him about his spiritual reality that we live in. That he knew a lot about. He's a genius in that area. He's so simple in what he says. And he had something that knocked my socks off. The kingdom of heaven is within us. That is our true nature. I had done an hour show on our addiction, alcoholism, and 3 principles with Bill Pettit, Dr. Bill Pettit, on the true nature of the principles. I learned more from that one quote by this man than I did for the whole hour that we were discussing the show about it. That's simple. That's our true nature. That's what you live. The other stuff is a lot of noise. And it takes you away like it did for me. Terry, the answer to your question was, I had a lot of noise in my head. Surprise. Yeah. And I lost my gratitude. Surprise. And I got confused. Surprise. And bad luck started to happen. Surprise. And then I picked myself up, kept going. And somewhere along the line, I said, I don't have to be anything. I'm just going to be Harry. I didn't have any money. I didn't have anything except the love of my son. And I just got happy and content. And then everything came. Everything came. So simple. Stop complaining and start enjoying. And it's a lot of fun. And yeah, do I get ticked off with your president? Yeah. But I quickly shut off the TV or else my mind goes too crazy type of stuff. You find out what it is to be real, genuine. And the thing that I had in spades was I was honest with myself. I was not pretending. I could not do that. I could not pretend. And then I had the greatest gift that I think we can have in this age. I had the teachings of Sydney Banks. And they keep teaching me. And guess what? They're good. They're gold. I keep learning deeper and deeper levels of what he was saying. And you never come to the end of it. How can you? It's eternal. And that's who you are, James. You're eternal. It's a nice way to be. No pressure. But Sid once said one thing to me, because I was, quote, farting around. He said, it's not like you have all the time in the world, because at that time I felt young and this, but actually now I feel like the opposite. Ooh, there's the end sight there, I better, so I wrote the addiction, evolution of addiction recovery, made me an expert. Now I've written the second one, Evolution of Addiction Recovery, Book 2, 80%, but I don't want to release it yet. The 3P's not ready for it. So, I just, but I'm not ready to release it anyway. It's not finished. But, where do these things come from? I've never been addicted. I don't know anything about it. And yet I'm writing these books and I'm learning. Let's let the Spirit write it. I'm learning. I'm a baby. And, I'm just happy that some people want to learn a few things from me. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a counselor. I call myself an educator. My goal with students if they learn one little itsy bitsy more about the mind, session's a success. That's it. That's all I care about. And have a good time.
Harry, yeah, thank you so much, Harry.
Thank you for coming, by the way, appreciate it. And yeah.
Just want to let everybody know the next webinar is with Sandy Crott, and it's on Tuesday, June 16th. So hopefully we'll see you live then. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.